Lecture 7 Economic Fluctuation. After we have explained the changes in GDP in long run, we see that in the long period of time, the changes in GDP follow the long run trend, and it is the increasing. But in a certain years, in these marked years, GDP stay constant or even reduce. This is called recession. And these changes is called the short-run fluctuation. The short-run fluctuation are the short and unpredictable. So when you look at this graph, you can see that sometimes the two recessions are very close, and sometimes the two recessions are very far. So it is unpredictable. The changes in the economy in short run is called the economic cycle or business cycle. And there are two main major changes in the business cycle. Firstly, the recession. When GDP reduces relatively to the long run trend, we call this is the recession. And when the GDP increased too much relatively to the long run trend, so it is called booming. And the booming and especially recession are not good because this is the shock or the changes in the economy. There will be many uncertainties, and besides the changes in GDP, we also have the changes in many other variables, for example, output, the price, and unemployment. And if you look at this example, the unemployment rate in US, these in the recession years, the unemployment rate increased sharply. At the same time, GDP reduced. This relation between real GDP and unemployment is called Okun law, and we have explained it in lecture 4 already. We have explained it in lecture 2, data of macroeconomics. So now there's a big question that why there is the changes in GDP in short run, or in other words, why there is recession and how to solve this problem. So in the following section, part 2, 3, and 4, we will introduce the model to explain the changes in economic fluctuation and also suggest the solution for the fluctuation. This model applies the demand and supply rule. So in the macroeconomics, we have aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Firstly, aggregate demand is the total output demanded by all economic agents. And because we have 4 economic agents, consumer, firms, government, and the foreign sector, so we also have the 4 determinants of AD, aggregate demand. Firstly, consumption is the total output demanded by consumer. Second, investment measure the total output demanded by firms. Third, government spending or government purchase measure the total output demanded by the government. And last, net export measure the net total output demanded by the foreigner. So finally, aggregate demand is the sum of the 4 demands. and it is we can rewrite the net export into two value, the difference between export and import. So what is the relation between output here, output demanded, and the price? The changes in the price lead to the negative change in output according to the low demand. And in macroeconomics, we explain this relation with the three effects. The first effect, the wealth effect. It is explained clearly and in detail in the textbook. So please read carefully from the textbook. We will briefly explain that according to the wealth effect, when the price falls, the wealth of consumer also become more valuable and they can spend more. So the demand for goods and services increase. So we won't have the negative change between the price and the quantity demanded. The second theory is the interest rate effect. When we have the changes in the interest rate, it depends on the changes in the price. If the price is higher, so in nominal interest rate also be increased, and vice versa. So if the price falls, interest rate also falls, and it will make firm to pay less when they borrow good and they borrow funds from the financial system. So they will invest more, and the quantity demanded increase when the price falls. And the last effect to explain this relation is the international trade effect or substitute effect or the exchange rate effect. If the domestic price falls relatively to foreign price, so it means that the goods and services, the domestic goods and services become cheaper and export increase. And finally, we have the increase in the demand. So these three effects explain the changes, the movement along AD. There are many other reasons to lead to the change in AD, not the changes in the price. And so if we have the prices constant, but we have the changes in consumption, investment, government spending, or net export, so AD will change at the constant price. And this is called the shift of AD. And if AD increase, so it will shift to the right. And if it's reduced, so it will shift to the left. Another important component of the model is aggregate supply, AS. Aggregate supply is the total output that all firms ready to produce and sell at a given price level. We have two terms for the AS, the long-term AS and the short-term or the short-run AS. In short run, there's a very important assumption that factors of production are fixed. It means that the stock of equipment or factory cannot be changed easily in a year. We just can change it in long run. So in long run, factors of production is assumed to be changed, flexible, not fixed. And second, In short run, the price is not flexible and information is not well perceived by both seller and buyer. The theory of AS in short run is raised and called Keynesian theory. It is raised by John Maynard Keynes and his associates. In long run, the price is assumed to be completely flexible and information is well perceived. So, this theory is raised by classical economists, and this is called classical theory of money neutral. So because the price is completely flexible and easy to change and stabilize the output, so we will have in long run the aggregate supply is vertical thanks to the flexibility of the price. And if we have the changes in the factors of production, so there will be the shift of some long run AS, shift to the right or to the left depending on the increase or reduction of the production factors. What about in short run? The theory to explain the supply in short run is sticky wedge theory. There is the fact that in short run, nominal wage are slowly to adjust. So we call it sticky in short run. And the wages do not adjust, so there will be the constant or the price is also be difficult to adjust. And we have the lower price will make employment and production less profitable, and so firm will reduce the production. Because of this, with the lower price, output of production reduced, and we have the positive relation between the price and supply. The short run supply curve is upward sloping. This is the supply, the aggregate supply given the 4 factors of production in short run. And if for any reason there is a change in the production factors like this, so there will be the shift of aggregate supply to the right if supply increased, or to the left if aggregate supply reduced. So now we have the combination for the 3 important factors in this model. Firstly is the aggregate demand. There are 4 important components for the AD: consumption, investment, government spending, and net export is the difference between export and import. And next, we have the 2 curves for supply: the long run supply and the short run supply. The long run supply is constant, is independent from the price, and the output depends on the production factor, and with the given production factor we will have a given output. This is called potential output. For the short-run aggregate supply, we have the upward sloping, and it depends on the production factor as well, and these changes will lead to the shift of AS. So remember that slide number 21 is a very important slide to summarize the main factors for the model, including the changes or the main factor to the changes in AD and also to AS. And now, after having the main components like this, we go to explain or using this model to explain changes in the economy, called demand shock or supply shock. Firstly, we determine the equilibrium state for the model. That is the intersection or the crossing point between AS and AD in short run. At this crossing point, we have E0 is the equilibrium, and at this equilibrium, we have the price at the equilibrium and output. This also be the actual GDP for the year. And if this actual GDP equal to the potential GDP, it means that the equilibrium point stay in the long run AS. So this is called long run equilibrium. But if the equilibrium E1 is stand aside, to the left of long run AS, it means that the actual output is lower than the potential output. So this is called recession or depression. A serious recession is called depression. And vice versa. If the equilibrium E2 is on the right to the long run AS, so it means that actual GDP now is higher than the potential output. So we will call this equilibrium state as booming or the bubble economy. So what are the reasons lead to the changes in output? There are two main reasons: from demand or from supply. So now, from the textbook, you have the very detailed explanation for these two sections. So please refer to the explanation in textbook. And here I will have a brief explanation for you. Firstly, for demand shock. If there is a demand shock and it will shift AD to the left, there are many reasons for the demand shock. But finally, AD shift to the left and we have the new equilibrium at point B. So as a result, the price B and output Y also reduce. We have lower price and also lower output, and this is called the short run equilibrium. So this is one reason to lead the economy into recession. The output now is lower than potential output. Second, another reason may come from supply, and this is called supply shock. The supply shock shift the AS to maybe the right or to the left. And now, for example, the AS shift to the left and we have the new equilibrium at point B. So at the new equilibrium, the economy has higher price and lower output. The higher price is called inflation, and the lower output is called stagnation or recession. So the combination in this case, inflation with stagnation, is called stagflation. It refers to the case that the economy falls into inflation and stagnation at the same time. So this fluctuation at point B, the recession, or like this, is not predicted. It's not wanted. So how to solve this problem? In part 3, we explain briefly the two policies as a solution to stabilize the economy from recession and bring the economy back to the potential output. This is fiscal policy and monetary policy. In fact, these two policies will be explained in more detail in the next lecture, in lecture 8 and 9. So in this lecture, I will briefly explain it to see the application of policy in stabilizing output. Firstly, fiscal policy. The tools of this policy are government spending, G, and the tax, T. When we change tax or government spending, so we will have the changes in AD. If increase the tax or reduce government spending, and finally AD reduced and shift to the left, this policy is called tightening policy or contractionary policy. Vice versa, when we change government spending and tax, lead to the increase in AD, so this policy is called expanding policy or expansionary policy. For the second policy, monetary policy, we have the central bank control money supply. And when money supply change, it will lead to the change in interest rate, investment, and finally AD. A policy to increase AD is called expansionary monetary policy, and a policy to reduce AD is called tightening or contractionary monetary policy. So for both policy, we can see that if we apply the expansionary policy, means expansionary fiscal policy and expansionary monetary policy, AD increase and shift to the right. And finally, we will have higher price and higher output. And if we use the tightening or the contractionary policy, means the contractionary monetary policy and contractionary fiscal policy, it will shift AD to the left. And finally, we have lower price and also lower output. This is the result for the policy in stabilizing the economy using ASAD model. In fact, If we don't use any policy, it means that no intervention of the government, the economy will also be self-adjusted in mid-run and long run. So the mechanism of the self-adjustment of the economy is explained in part 4, the last part of this lecture. Firstly, we go from the short-run fluctuation. These changes in short-run will cause the adjustment in labor market in mid-run, and finally, it leads to the adjustment in long run to the aggregate supply and output. So now is one example. For example, we have the AD shock to reduce, and AD shift to the left. At the new equilibrium, the price is lower and output also be lower. And because of the lower output, unemployment increase. And it means that there is surplus of labor in the labor market. So in short run, the economy won't be in recession like this and nothing change more in short run. But in mid and long run, because there is the surplus of labor, so the price of labor falls. It is the wage falls. And wages is one of the cost of production. So this change leads to the falls in production cost and increased profit for firms. Because of higher profit, firms will increase their production and shift ADAS to the right. So finally, the increase in ADAS will increase the output step by step. And finally, we have the final increase is at the potential output. At the new equilibrium, this point, all markets, it means the labor markets and the goods and services market, this model, are in equilibrium. So there will be no more change. And the economy has the long run equilibrium. So now we can see that after an AD shock, if we have an AD shock and there's no government intervention, no policy, the short run equilibrium, in the short run, we have the lower price and output reduced. The economy fall into recession. But in long run, the price may be lower, even lower. But the output increase back to the potential level. And we say that the economy self-stabilized to the long run output or the natural rate of output. The similar example, case 2, 3, and 4 are explained in the following slides. Slide number 36, 37, and 39. So please read it by yourself. So now, we have the summary for this lecture. The ADAS model is a very important and useful model to explain the changes in the economy when there is a shock, to explain the reason for recession and booming in the economy. And we also suggest the policy to stabilize the economy. So this is the end for lecture 7, ADAS. And the more explanation policy will be explained in lecture 8 and 9.